1,178 others had been wounded. Of the 96 warships at Pearl Harbor, 18 had been sunk or severely damaged. 5 of the 8 Pacific Fleet battleships, the U.S. Navy's primary strike force, were on the bottom or out of commission. Of the 388 Army, Navy, and Marine aircraft based in Hawaii, 199 had been damaged or destroyed, and fewer than 100 were left usable. As the Americans tended the wounded, fought fires, rescued shipmates, and tried to salvage sinking vessels, 6 Japanese carriers, 200 miles north of Oahu, recovered their aircraft and turned back west, escaping unscathed. Only 29 of Fushida's pilots failed to return. The U.S. soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines in Hawaii were not the only Americans to fight the Empire of Japan on this day of infamy. That evening, the Japanese struck our bases and facilities on Guam, on Wake Island, and in the Philippines. British and Dutch forces were assaulted in Hong Kong and Malaya, and on the 8th of December, while Congress debated a resolution to declare war, the Imperial Navy attacked Midway. These coordinated attacks, part of a master plan reluctantly devised by Fleet Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Japanese Combined Fleet, were deemed in Tokyo to be a stunning military success. But Pearl Harbor became something else that the Emperor and most of his ambitious generals and admirals could not foresee as they celebrated their short-lived victory. Until the Japanese surrender in Tokyo Bay on the 14th of August, 1945, Americans from every walk of life and every ethnic background would be motivated to serve in uniform, work harder, eat less, volunteer more, and buy war bonds, all with the rallying cry, "Remember Pearl Harbor." As a boy, I had read about that day of infamy, seen the pictures and newsreels, and later studied it at the Naval Academy. Then I visited this hallowed place while commuting to and from other wars. But it wasn't until I began interviewing those who were young men and women on the 7th of December, 1941, that I began to grasp what that day was really like and what it meant to a generation of Americans. More than 6 decades after the event, every one of these warriors and their contemporaries, no matter where they were at the time, can recall exactly what they were doing and who they were with when they learned about the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Many of them didn't even know where this Hawaiian naval base was when they first heard about the raid, but everyone knew what it meant. America was now in the war that most had hoped to avoid. In the days after the attack, newspapers, magazines, and newsreels at local movie theaters quickly educated the American people about the geography of Hawaii and the damage that had been done to America's Pacific Fleet. That same Remember Pearl Harbor rallying cry became a call to battle for the legions of young men showing up at recruiting and induction centers. It was a slogan that stuck all the way across the broad expanse of ocean and the bloody battles of what came to be called the Pacific Theater of War. Newspapers printed full-page maps of the region, and families tacked them up on kitchen and living room walls so that sweethearts, wives, parents, and siblings could keep track of where their loved ones were serving in the far reaches of that vast ocean. Tiny dots on those maps and locations with unpronounceable names became places to pray about in churches and weep over in the privacy of a bedroom. The ocean that spanned those maps was anything but Pacific during World War II. From the opening shots fired here at Pearl Harbor to the armistice signed in Tokyo Bay 3 years, 8 months, and 24 days later, this body of water and its islands were the venue for the biggest air and naval engagements in history, and some of the bloodiest land battles ever fought. The enemy that America was pitted against in the Pacific proved to be an implacable foe. Unlike our European adversaries, the Vichy French, Mussolini's Italian legions, or the German Wehrmacht, no Japanese Imperial Army unit ever surrendered until the armistice was signed on the deck of the USS Missouri on the 2nd of September, 1945. The Japanese literally fought to the death. Whether they served on air, land, or sea, the young Americans sent off to contend with the Japanese Army, Navy, and Air Force proved to be a remarkable lot. They are men and women often described in superlatives. Most were born in the aftermath of the war to end all wars, were toddlers in the Roaring Twenties, and came of age during the Great Depression. Though few were unaffected by these events and the global economic catastrophe that began in America with the stock market crash of 1929, nearly all I've known have possessed a remarkable sense of optimism. This generation grew up in an America that was still overwhelmingly rural. Their sources of information on current events were newsreels at neighborhood movie theaters, hometown newspapers, radio, and discussions over the family kitchen table. They matured in the harsh reality of hard times. Devastating droughts in our agricultural heartland, massive depression-induced unemployment, and increasing uncertainty as Bolshevism swept across Russia and fascism took hold in Italy, Japan, Spain, and Germany. Though most of those I interviewed for our War Stories documentaries and this book were just teenagers as war clouds gathered and broke over Asia and Europe in the 1930s, nearly all were familiar with the intrigues and events leading up to the conflagration. Yet few of them expected that America would be plunged into that awful cauldron. Most believed, as did their parents, that the broad blue waters of the Atlantic and the Pacific insulated them from the troubles in faraway lands. Many cited the promises made by politicians of every persuasion who assured the American people that what was happening over there wasn't our fight. Late in the summer of 1941, with Hitler dominating Europe and on the march toward Moscow, with Japanese forces controlling most of the Chinese coast and occupying Indochina, and with Britain being bombed daily, Congress began deliberations on the Selective Service Extension Act. The bill, authorizing the movement of American military personnel overseas and extending their term of service, was considered by opponents to be jingoistic, warlike, and too provocative for a neutral nation. The hotly contested debate reflected the ambivalence of the American people on the issue of our involvement in someone else's war. On the 12th of August, 1941, the law passed the House of Representatives by a single vote. Fewer than 4 months later, the attack on Pearl Harbor erased those uncertainties. For the young Americans already in service, and those now called up by the millions, it soon became obvious that while the war in Europe would be an Allied fight, the fight in the Pacific theater would be a predominantly American affair. They also quickly learned that they would face years of separation from those they loved, and they confronted the terrible prospect of death in a strange-sounding spot in the middle of an ocean most had never seen. This book is about them. This isn't a book about war. It's about warriors. It isn't really a history book. It's about those who made history. The young Americans from every walk of life, from every part of this great nation who came to serve with the words, "Remember Pearl Harbor," ringing in their ears. Their self-effacing, modest words are offered here as a memorial to heroic sacrifice in the crucible of dramatic and often deadly events that began with the attack on Pearl Harbor and ended with Japan's surrender in Tokyo Bay.